Looking back, I wonder if there was ever a moment when things could have gone differently. If there was a point where I could have stopped it, where I could have seen the signs and changed the outcome. But the truth is, some betrayals are like cracks in the foundation of a house. Small at first. Easy to miss. Until one day, everything collapses. Camilla and I had been married for almost 2 decades. We met young, built a life together, and raised our son, Derek, in what I thought was a happy home. She was charming and vibrant, the kind of woman who could command attention without trying. I loved that about her once. But somewhere along the way, that charm became something else. That it started with subtle shifts. Camilla became more distant, her laughter less frequent. She started spending more time on her phone, always texting, always just out of earshot. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd smile and say, "Just a friend." But the smile never reached her eyes. Her late nights became more frequent. She'd leave after dinner, claiming she was out with friends or running errands, but she always returned home just a little too late, her excuses thin and her perfume lingering too long in the air. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. Stress, maybe. A rough patch we'd work through. But the doubt lingered, like a shadow I couldn't shake. And then there was Gerald, Derek's best friend. The kid had been around our house for years. Sleepovers, movie nights, weekends playing video games with Derek. I never thought twice about it. Why would I? But as the months passed, I started to notice things I couldn't explain. The way Camilla's eyes lingered on Gerald a little too long. The way her laugh sounded different when he was around, softer, more playful. The way she always found reasons to be near him when he visited. That I told myself I was imagining things. I had to be, but deep down, a part of me knew the truth, and soon, would see just how deep the betrayal went. The first time I truly questioned my marriage was on a Saturday afternoon, one of those lazy weekends where nothing seemed out of place. Derek had invited Gerald over to hang out, just like they'd done 100 times before. The boys were upstairs playing video games, their laughter drifting down the hall as I worked on fixing a leaky faucet in the kitchen. Camilla moved around the house like she always did, tidying up, checking her phone, humming softly under her breath. But there was something different about her that day. She seemed restless, her eyes flicking toward the staircase more often than usual. That I tried to ignore it. Later that afternoon, I passed by the living room and caught a glimpse of Camilla sitting on the couch. Her phone was in her lap, and she was smiling at the screen, the kind of smile she hadn't given me in months. "Who's that?" I asked casually, wiping my hands on a towel. She glanced up, her smile vanishing so quickly I wondered if I'd imagined it. "Oh, just a friend from work," she replied, slipping the phone into her pocket. Something about the way she said it, too quick, too smooth, set my nerves on edge. But I let it go. That night, as I sat beside her on the couch, I noticed the faint scent of cologne on her sweater. It wasn't mine. I opened my mouth to ask about it, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't want to sound paranoid, maybe I was imagining things, but the unease lingered, a faint hum at the back of my mind that refused to be ignored. A few days later, I came home early from work. The house was unusually quiet, no TV, no music, just the faint creak of floorboards above. I set my keys on the counter and started up the stairs, pausing when I heard faint voices coming from Derek's room. I recognized Derek's voice and Gerald's laughter. But there was another sound, a softer voice that made my pulse quicken. Camilla. Her laugh was soft, almost playful, the sound of it making my stomach twist in ways I couldn't explain. I stood outside the door, hand hovering over the knob, heart pounding in my chest. "What are you doing?" I told myself. "She's just checking on the boys." Don't be ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Before I could knock, the door opened, and Camilla stepped into the hallway. She startled when she saw me, her eyes widening for a split second before she quickly masked the surprise with a smile. "Allan. You're home early," she said, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Yeah, everything okay?" I asked, glancing past her into the room where Derek and Gerald sat cross-legged on the floor, controllers in hand, eyes glued to the screen. "Of course. Just bringing the boys some snacks," she said, holding up an empty plate as if that explained everything. That I nodded slowly, searching her face for any sign of guilt. But her smile remained steady, too steady. "All right," I said, stepping aside as she moved past me. But as she walked down the stairs, I couldn't help but notice the faint flush of color on her cheeks, the kind that had nothing to do with climbing stairs. That night, I lay awake beside Camilla, staring at the ceiling while she slept peacefully beside me. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer, doubts I couldn't shake. Was I imagining things? Was I reading too much into a few innocent moments? I turned my head, watching the soft rise and fall of her chest as she slept. The woman I'd loved for nearly 20 years, the mother of my son, couldn't possibly be capable of what my mind was suggesting, and yet, somewhere deep inside, I knew the truth was waiting to be uncovered, and when I found it, there would be no going back. The unease that had settled in my chest wouldn't go away. No matter how many times I told myself I was overthinking things, the doubts clung to me like a shadow. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more and more signs, small things that, on their own, might not have meant much. But together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. Camilla started spending more time upstairs when Gerald was over. She'd find reasons to linger near Derek's room, bringing snacks or asking if they needed anything. And each time she came back downstairs, there was a certain look in her eyes. Something I couldn't quite place but felt deep in my gut. Then there was the phone. Her phone, once casually left on countertops and nightstands, now seemed permanently attached to her hand. She'd tilt the screen away when I passed by, and her laughter while reading messages sounded different, lighter, more intimate. One night, curiosity got the better of me. While she was in the shower, I picked up her phone from the nightstand. The screen was locked, of course. But as I stared at the black screen, my heart pounded in my chest that I tried to shake the feeling, placing the phone back where I found it. But the seed of doubt had already taken root. It was a Saturday evening when the first undeniable clue appeared. Derek had gone to a friend's house for the night, and Gerald had left earlier that afternoon, or so I thought. That I was in the garage, organizing tools, when I heard footsteps on the stairs above. Strange, I thought Camilla was watching TV in the living room. I set down the wrench I was holding and quietly made my way back inside. As I approached the hallway, I heard soft laughter, feminine and low. Camilla's laugh. I stepped closer. A faint creak of floorboards echoed from upstairs, followed by the quiet murmur of voices. My pulse quickened. I stood frozen, listening as the muffled conversation continued just beyond my reach, then footsteps that I barely had time to move before Camilla appeared at the top of the stairs. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me, but her smile was quick and practiced. "Oh. I thought you were still in the garage," she said, descending the stairs with forced casualness. I replied slowly, glancing past her toward the hallway that led to Derek's room. "I thought Gerald left hours ago." She hesitated just for a split second. "But I saw it." "Oh, he just came back to grab something Derek forgot." "He's gone now," she said smoothly, too smoothly. I stepped aside as she passed, my gaze lingering on her as she disappeared into the kitchen. My mind raced with questions, but the one that echoed loudest was the one I didn't want to answer. Was I losing my wife to my son's best friend? That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed beside Camilla, staring at the ceiling as her breaths fell into the steady rhythm of sleep. The room felt colder, heavier, as if the air itself was holding its breath. At some point past midnight, I got up. The house was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the heater. I made my way downstairs, my mind churning with thoughts I couldn't escape. As I passed the kitchen, something caught my eye, the faint glow of a phone screen on the countertop. Camilla's phone. I paused, staring at it as if it might reveal its secrets without me needing to touch it. But I knew better. Steeling myself, I picked it up. The screen was locked, but a single notification flashed in the corner. A message, from Gerald. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the name, my pulse thundering in my ears. I wanted to believe it was innocent, that there was some logical explanation. But deep down, I knew. I set the phone down carefully, as if touching it too long might burn me. Upstairs, Camilla slept peacefully, but I knew that the whole truth was just beyond my reach, and I was going to find it. The next morning, the house felt different, like the air itself was holding its breath. I moved through the kitchen with a heaviness I couldn't shake, my thoughts circling around the name I'd seen flashing on Camilla's phone the night before, Gerald. That I tried to convince myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe he needed help with school. Maybe Derek had asked Camilla to pass along a message. Maybe stop lying to yourself, a voice inside me whispered. That I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands trembling slightly as I stared out the window. Outside, the world carried on as if nothing had changed. But inside me, the foundation of my marriage was beginning to crack. Later that day, Derek invited Gerald over again. The sound of their laughter drifted down the stairs as they played video games in Derek's room. The familiar noise should have been comforting, just two boys hanging out like they always did, but now, every laugh, every creak of the floorboards felt like a warning sign. Camilla moved around the house, tidying up the living room with a restless energy that only added to my unease. I watched her carefully, the way she glanced toward the stairs when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her phone buzzed softly in her pocket, her fingers brushing against it as if drawn by instinct. That I couldn't take it anymore. That I set my coffee down and stepped into the hallway. "Camilla," I called. She turned, her smile quick but strained. "Yeah? Can we talk?" Her eyes flicked toward the staircase for the briefest moment before she nodded. "Of course. What's on your mind?" I led her into the dining room, closing the door behind us to muffle the sound of the boys upstairs. The air between us felt thick, heavy with unspoken words. "I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my voice steady. "What's going on with you and Gerald?" Her eyes widened, her smile faltering for a moment before she caught herself. "Gerald? What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Camilla. I saw his name on your phone last night. And I've noticed the way you act when he's around." Her shoulders tensed, and she took a step back, folding her arms across her chest. "You're being ridiculous. He's just a kid, Derek's friend." "What, you think there's something going on between us?" She laughed, but the sound was hollow. "Then show me your phone," I said quietly. Her smile vanished. "What?" "Your phone," I repeated. "If there's nothing to hide, let me see it." She hesitated, her fingers curling against her sleeves. "Allan, this is crazy. You're acting paranoid." "Am I?" I stepped closer, my voice low but firm. "Then prove it. Show me the messages." Her eyes darted toward the door, as if searching for an escape. "I don't have to prove anything to you," she snapped. "I'm allowed to have friends. You're turning this into something it's not." "Then why won't you show me?" I demanded, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Because I shouldn't have to," she shot back, her cheeks flushing with anger. "Or was it guilt? You're invading my privacy, treating me like some criminal, because you're lying to me." I cut her off, my voice rising despite myself. Silence fell between us, thick and suffocating. Her chest rose and fell with quick, shallow breaths as she stared at me, her eyes dark with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, guilt, or something worse. Finally, she turned away, her fingers brushing against the edge of the table as if searching for something to hold on to. "I can't believe you'd accuse me of something like this," she whispered. "Then tell me the truth," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "Because right now, I don't know what to believe." She said nothing, and in that moment, I knew. The silence told me everything. That night, I lay awake in bed beside her, staring at the ceiling as her breaths fell into the steady rhythm of sleep. The confrontation had given me no answers, only more questions. But one thing was clear, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The next time I saw proof, there would be no turning back. The next evening, Derek invited Gerald over again. Their laughter echoed from upstairs, but my focus was on Camilla. She moved through the house with restless energy, her eyes flicking toward the staircase as if waiting for something or someone. That I followed her quietly as she carried snacks upstairs, pausing outside Derek's room. Through the crack in the door, I saw her lean too close to Gerald, her hand brushing his shoulder as she whispered something I couldn't hear. My breath caught in my chest. She glanced toward the door, her eyes meeting mine for a split second before she stepped back, her smile vanishing. This wasn't imagination, this was real. And now, there was no going back. That I couldn't shake the image from my mind. Camilla leaning too close to Gerald, the flicker of something unmistakable in her eyes. That night, as I lay beside her in bed, my heart pounded with the weight of what I suspected but couldn't yet prove. That I needed more than suspicion, that I needed proof. The next afternoon, Derek asked to sleep over at a friend's house. I watched closely as Camilla's eyes flicked toward Gerald, who was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Her fingers tapped against the kitchen counter, a nervous habit I'd learned to recognize. Maybe Gerald should head home, too, I said, keeping my voice casual. Camilla's gaze snapped to mine, too quickly. Oh, he can stay a bit longer. No rush, right? Gerald glanced up with a faint smile, innocent enough, but something about the way he looked at her made my chest tighten. That I forced a smile and nodded, but inside, my pulse thundered with anticipation. That night, I waited. That I pretended to go to bed early, slipping beneath the covers while Camilla stayed downstairs, claiming she wanted to watch TV for a bit. I lay there in the dark, listening to the faint murmur of the television and the occasional creak of floorboards. Minutes stretched into hours, each second ticking by with agonizing slowness. My breath felt shallow as I stared at the ceiling, waiting for the moment when silence would fall, when I would know. Finally, just past midnight, I heard it, the faint click of the television being turned off, the soft shuffle of footsteps across the floor, then muffled laughter. My chest tightened as I slipped out of bed, moving silently down the hallway toward the stairs. Each step felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff, knowing that once I reached the bottom, there would be no turning back. That I paused outside the living room door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The faint hum of whispered voices drifted through the wood, their words too soft to make out, but the tone was unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat. That I pushed the door open. Camilla and Gerald sprang apart, their faces flushed with shock. She sat on the couch beside him, her hand still resting on his thigh, proof enough that my worst fears were true. Allan, she started, but I held up a hand, my voice low and steady despite the storm raging inside me. Don't, I said. Don't lie. Not this time. Silence fell between us, heavy with everything that had led to this moment. Gerald stood quickly, stammering something about leaving, but I didn't hear him. My gaze remained locked on Camilla, the woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with, and in that moment, I knew there was no going back. Gerald bolted from the room, stumbling over his words as he grabbed his jacket and fled into the night. The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house, leaving only silence and the weight of what I had just seen. Camilla stood frozen beside the couch, her chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. Her eyes darted toward the stairs as if she might still find an escape. But there was nowhere left to run. That I stepped forward, my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. How long has this been going on? Allan, please, how long? I repeated, my voice louder this time, the control slipping from my grasp. Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Don't lie to me again, I said, stepping closer. I need the truth. Now. Her shoulders sagged, as if the weight of her secrets had finally become too much to bear. She lowered her gaze, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. 6 months, she whispered. The breath left my lungs in a sharp rush, as though I'd been punched in the gut. I stumbled back a step, gripping the back of the chair to steady myself. 6 months, with Derek's best friend? Tears welled in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt or fear of what would come next. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, her voice breaking. It just happened. I let out a harsh laugh, the sound bitter and raw. Don't give me that. You had a choice. Every time you texted him, every time you let him into this house, you made a choice. Her lips parted as if to argue, but I cut her off with a sharp shake of my head. And you lied. Over and over. To me. To Derek. You've destroyed everything we built. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I couldn't feel any sympathy. "Not anymore, Allan, please. I still love you," she whispered, stepping toward me. "Don't," I said, raising a hand to stop her. "Don't say that. You don't get to say that now." The air between us crackled with everything that had gone unsaid for months, every suspicion, every doubt, every moment I had ignored the truth because I didn't want to believe it, but now, there was no escaping it, and there was no going back. The room seemed to shrink around us, the air thick with words we could never take back. I stood motionless, the echo of Camilla's confession ringing in my ears. 6 months. 6 months of betrayal. 6 months of lies. And with Gerald that I ran a hand through my hair, my pulse hammering in my chest. "How could you?" My voice cracked despite my best effort to hold it steady. "With him? Derek's best friend?" Camilla's tears streamed down her cheeks. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did," I shot back. "You hurt all of us, me, Derek, even Gerald. Do you understand what you've done?" "I was lonely, Allan." Her voice rose, desperation creeping into her tone. "You've been so distant, always focused on work. I needed to feel wanted alive. And you thought the answer was a teenage boy?" The words burned as I said them aloud. "Do you even hear yourself right now?" She sobbed into her hands, but the sight did nothing to ease the ache inside me. I wanted to feel angry, to yell, to break something. But all I felt was, hollow. I turned away, pacing to the window as my mind spun with the weight of what had just unfolded. Outside, the moon hung low, casting a pale glow over the snow-dusted lawn. The world looked peaceful, completely unaware that my life had just imploded. Behind me, Camilla sniffled. "Please, Allan, don't leave. We can fix this." I clenched my fists at my sides, forcing myself to breathe. "Fix this?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "How do you fix something that's been broken for 6 months?" Silenced, I turned back to face her, the weight of my decision settling deep in my chest. "This, whatever this is, it's over. I can't stay in this house with you, not after what you've done." "Allan, please, I need time to think," I cut her off, my voice low but firm. "But right now, I need space. Don't follow me." Without waiting for her reply, I grabbed my coat and stepped outside into the night, the cold air biting against my skin. But it was nothing compared to the cold settling inside my heart. Each step away from the house felt like breaking free from invisible chains I hadn't even realized I'd been wearing for so long. But no matter how far I walked, one question echoed in my mind: how do I tell Derek? The air outside was sharp and biting, but the cold did nothing to numb the ache in my chest. My breath came in ragged bursts, misting in the night air as I walked down the driveway with no real destination, just the need to get away from the suffocating walls of the house that no longer felt like home. Every step echoed with the memory of Camilla's confession. 6 months. 6 months of stolen glances, secret texts, and lies woven so tightly that I hadn't seen the truth until it stood right in front of me. And with Gerald, the boy I'd watched grow up alongside Derek. The betrayal cut deeper because it wasn't just about me. It was about my son. That I stopped beneath the street lamp at the corner of our block, the snow crunching beneath my boots as I ran a hand through my hair. My pulse still pounded in my ears, but the anger that had burned so hot inside me now settled into something heavier: sadness. How had we come to this? I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the empty street as if it held the answers I needed. Eventually, my thoughts settled on the one decision I couldn't avoid any longer. Derek had to know that he deserved the truth. Even if it shattered his world as much as it had shattered mine. But how could I tell him that the woman he called Mom had betrayed us both, and worse, with his best friend? The weight of it all pressed down on my chest, suffocating and relentless. But no matter how much I wanted to shield Derek from the pain, I knew I couldn't keep this from him, not when the truth would come out sooner or later. Taking a deep breath, I turned back toward the house, my footsteps heavy against the snow. Each step felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff, knowing there was no turning back. But this was a conversation that couldn't wait. It had to happen tonight. The walk back to the house felt heavier than the one leaving it. Each step carried the weight of what I had to do, the conversation that would change Derek's world forever. As I approached the front door, the faint glow of the living room lights spilled onto the snow-covered porch. I paused, hand resting on the doorknob as I took a deep breath to steady myself. No matter how much I prepared, nothing could soften the blow of what I had to say. Pushing the door open, I stepped inside, the warmth of the house contrasting with the cold knot in my chest. The muffled hum of the TV echoed from the living room, where Camilla sat curled on the couch. She glanced up, eyes red and swollen, but I ignored her and headed straight for the stairs. "Where are you going?" she called after me, her voice shaky. "To talk to Derek," I replied without looking back. "Allan, please don't." I stopped halfway up the stairs, gripping the railing until my knuckles turned white. "Don't what?" I said, my voice low but sharp. "Don't tell him the truth. Don't tell him what you've done." Silenced, I continued up the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I reached Derek's room, I paused outside the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. This was it. I knocked gently. "Derek? Can I come in?" "Yeah, Dad," he called, his voice muffled through the door. I pushed it open, finding him sitting cross-legged on his bed with his laptop open beside him. He looked up with a smile that instantly made my heart ache because I was about to break that smile with the truth. "Hey, buddy," I said, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. I sat down on the edge of the bed, searching for the right words. But no matter how I tried to start, nothing felt right. "What's wrong?" Derek asked, his smile fading as he noticed the tension in my face. I took a shaky breath, meeting his gaze. "Derek, I need to talk to you about something important." He set his laptop aside, his brow furrowed. "Is it about Mom? And Gerald?" My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Derek hesitated, his eyes darting toward the floor. "I've noticed things. The way she looks at him sometimes. And the way Gerald acts around her." I swallowed hard. "And you didn't say anything?" "I thought I was imagining it," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want to believe it. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tremble beneath my fingers. "Derek, I need to be honest with you. I caught them together tonight. It's been going on for 6 months." His breath hitched as if the air had been knocked from his lungs. He pulled away, burying his face in his hands as his shoulders shook with silent sobs. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him close as the tears came, tears of heartbreak, confusion, and betrayal. "I'm so sorry, son," I whispered. "I know this hurts. More than anything, I wish I could take this pain away. But we're going to get through this. Together." He clung to me, his tears soaking into my shirt as the weight of the truth settled between us. And in that moment, I knew that no matter how much my world had fallen apart, I had to stay strong for him, because now, more than ever, he needed me. Derek's sobs slowly faded into shaky breaths as I held him, the weight of everything we'd just faced pressing heavy against my chest. His shoulders trembled beneath my hands, each breath ragged and uneven. I don't get it," he whispered, his voice muffled against my shirt. "Why would she do this? Why with him?" I swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "I don't know, son. Sometimes people make choices that hurt the ones they love. It doesn't make sense, and it's not fair, but it's not your fault." "But Gerald, he was my best friend," Derek choked out, pulling back to look at me with red-rimmed eyes. "How could he do this to me? How could she?" I placed a hand on the back of his neck, squeezing gently. "I wish I had an answer, but all I know is that you deserve better. We both do." Silence settled between us, heavy with everything we couldn't put into words. But in that moment, something shifted, the unspoken bond between a father and son, forged in the fire of shared heartbreak. After a long pause, Derek wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie and took a shaky breath. "What happens now?" I met his gaze, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. Now, we move forward. Together. We can't change what happened, but we can decide what happens next. He nodded slowly, the weight of the truth settling into his eyes, but beneath the sadness, I saw a flicker of strength. I'm with you, Dad, he said softly, and I'm with you, I replied that no matter what came next, we would face it together. The next morning felt different, like the air in the house had shifted, heavy with the weight of what had been said the night before. Derek barely touched his breakfast, pushing scrambled eggs around his plate as if the answers he needed were somewhere beneath them. I sat across from him, sipping my coffee in silence. Words felt useless now. There was no way to erase what had happened. Camilla moved through the kitchen with cautious steps, her gaze flicking between us as if searching for a chance to break the silence. But neither of us spoke to her. Finally, she set her coffee down and cleared her throat. Derek, can we talk? He stiffened, his fork clattering against the plate as he pushed back from the table. What's there to talk about? His voice trembled, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. Sweetheart, please. I know you're hurt, but I know. Derek shouted, his chair scraping against the tile as he stood. His eyes shone with unshed tears. You lied to me. To Dad. And with Gerald, how could you do that? He was my best friend. Derek, I never wanted. Stop lying. His voice cracked, and my heart ached at the raw pain in his eyes. You ruined everything. Camilla stepped forward, but Derek bolted from the kitchen, his footsteps pounding up the stairs before the bedroom door slammed shut. Silence fell over the room, thick and suffocating. That I stood slowly, setting my coffee mug down with deliberate care before turning to face Camilla. You see what you've done? My voice was calm, but the edge of anger beneath it was undeniable. Allan. I'm trying. No. Don't try. Don't justify what you did. The damage is done. Her shoulders sagged as tears filled her eyes, but I no longer had the strength to care. That I turned away, my footsteps echoing through the house as I made my way upstairs. I paused outside Derek's door, knocking gently. Derek, it's Dad. Silence. I waited a moment longer, then tried the handle. It wasn't locked. I stepped inside to find him sitting on the edge of his bed, shoulders hunched and head bowed, hands gripping the edge of the mattress as if holding himself together by sheer will. I sat beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. I know it hurts, I said softly. And it's going to hurt for a while. But I promise you, we'll get through this. Together. His breath hitched, and he leaned against me, the weight of his grief settling against my side. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. It was about saving what was left of our family. The house was quiet that evening, too quiet. The air between us hung heavy with the weight of words spoken and unspoken. Derek had stayed in his room most of the day, and I couldn't blame him. Camilla sat on the couch, her eyes distant, her fingers tracing patterns on the armrest as if searching for something to hold on to. But there was nothing left to grasp. I stood in the doorway, watching her in silence. Part of me still wanted to understand how could she do this. But the other part knew that understanding wouldn't change anything. Finally, she looked up, her gaze meeting mine with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. Allan, please. Can we talk? I stepped into the room, my pulse steady despite the ache in my chest. There's nothing left to say, Camilla. Yes, there is. Her voice trembled as she stood, taking a hesitant step toward me. I know I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I still love you. I still love our family. Can't we try to fix this? I swallowed hard, my hands clenching at my sides. How do you fix something that's been broken for 6 months? Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you or Derek, but you did, I interrupted, my voice firm but calm. You didn't just hurt me. You betrayed our son. You broke something inside him that I don't know if it can ever be repaired. Silence stretched between us, heavy and final. She took another step forward. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but if there's any chance, there isn't, I said softly, shaking my head. Not anymore. Her lips trembled, and for a moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago, the woman I had built a life with. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I could no longer trust. I'm filing for divorce, Camilla, I said, the words falling like stones between us. I've already contacted a lawyer. This is the end. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she covered her mouth with her hand, but I forced myself to stand firm. This was the only path forward for me and for Derek. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the silence of a life that could never be repaired. The next morning, the house felt like a shell of what it used to be. Sunlight streamed through the windows, but it did nothing to warm the cold emptiness that lingered in every room. I stood in the kitchen, staring into my coffee as if the answers I needed might somehow appear in its depths. Upstairs, Derek was still asleep. Camilla moved quietly through the house, packing a suitcase with clothes and personal items. We had agreed she would leave today. The faint thud of a drawer closing echoed through the air, each sound a reminder that this chapter was coming to an end. Part of me expected to feel regret, to question if I was making the right decision, but I didn't. Instead, there was a sense of relief slowly settling into my chest, a weight lifting as the future began to take shape without the shadows of betrayal clinging to it. Camilla appeared in the doorway, her suitcase in hand and her eyes red from crying. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I raised a hand, stopping her before the words could come. No more goodbyes, I said quietly. We've said everything that needed to be said. Her shoulders sagged, and after a long moment, she nodded. Without another word, she turned and walked to the door, pausing only briefly before stepping outside. The soft click of the door closing behind her echoed through the house, leaving behind a silence that felt more like a beginning than an end. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the stillness as if tasting freedom for the first time in years, and as I turned to head upstairs and check on Derek, I knew this was the first day of the rest of our lives. Days passed, and with each sunrise, the weight in my chest grew a little lighter. The air in the house felt different, cleaner, freer, without the tension that had hung over us for so long. Derek and I settled into a new routine. Mornings were filled with shared breakfasts and quiet conversations, the unspoken bond between us growing stronger with each passing day. Evenings brought laughter back into the house, tentative at first, but growing more natural as the wounds began to heal. Camilla's absence was felt, of course, but it wasn't the gaping void I'd feared. Instead, it was the space where something broken had been removed, leaving room for something new to grow. One afternoon, Derek sat beside me on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. Dad, he said quietly, staring at the horizon. Do you think things will ever feel normal again? I placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. Normal might look different now, I admitted. But that doesn't mean it can't be good. We've been through a lot, but we're stronger because of it. He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. Yeah. I think you're right. We sat in silence for a moment longer, the air between us filled with a sense of peace that had been missing for too long. Months later, the pain of betrayal had faded into the background, a scar that would always be there, but no longer defined us. Derek was thriving, his laughter more genuine, his friendship stronger. And as for me, I had learned that sometimes, the hardest goodbyes lead to the most important beginnings. Standing at the doorway of our home, I looked out at the world beyond, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. The past was behind us, the future was ours to write, and this time, we were free.